Good morning. It is 9:51 a.m. on Sunday, August 23rd, 2020. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. And because it is Sunday, I'm continuing my rewatch of The Legend of Korra with Book 2 Spirits episode, 9, The Guide. This episode is pretty good, largely on the basis of finally resolving some of the tension that had been artificially introduced throughout a lot of the season, and finally reuniting Korra and Tenzin and having them actually take steps to solve the real problem of the season instead of everyone messing around with stuff that's ultimately not that important. But, it is what it is. We have a number of different plot lines in this one. I think if I were to rank them, my least favorite is Mako and his continuing investigation of Varric. But mostly that's only just because it still doesn't make sense how Lin is acting. It's one thing for some of the other cops to be corrupt, but for her to trust them over Mako, yeah, some of that just doesn't work. So let's talk about that plot line. So in this episode, what we have, where we left this storyline was that Mako had come to the conclusion personally that Varric was responsible for a lot of this stuff going on, all as a sort of play to profit off the war and to take over Asami's company. But can't prove it, right? That's the problem. And so we begin in this episode with him going and trying to tell Bolin and Asami about, this whole, suspicion that he has. And they are unconvinced because, of course, the two of them, like, Bolin is working with Varric every day for the movers. Asami just made Varric her new business partner. They both have been given a lot from Varric, and so they're kind of, in addition to not wanting to believe the worst about him, they've got their own sort of material motivation, incentive to not want Varric to be the bad guy. Although, I think Varric is I think his character is actually one of the best things about Book 2. He's just, he's certainly doing bad things, but he still doesn't even really read like a true bad guy, right? It's not so much malice as much as it's really just selfishness, right? Like he's just prioritizing his own profit over anything else, which certainly isn't good. But it's also like, it's not mean-spirited. Although I guess there are some times where, it gets a little ambiguous. But, certainly with Mako trying unsuccessfully to persuade Asami and Bolin, and then he gets called in by Varric's goons to talk to him. And Varric has, I think, a really great, well-written speech to Mako about, not saying anything that's conclusive, but like innuendo of threats. So basically saying, Mako, I would like you to come work for me because I care so much about Asami and Bolin, and I would like your help in keeping them safe. So wouldn't you like to come work for me and keep your brother and your girlfriend safe? And it's like, it's exactly the sort of conversation where Mako is like, he's threatening me by threatening violence against them if I don't cooperate with him. But if he tries to explain that to anyone else, including Bolin and Asami, they'll say, you're intuiting malice where he's just like, why can't you just take him at face value that he cares about us and he wants you to work for him because he wants you to give up this crazy conspiracy that you've got cooked up. And so in that sense, it's really clever of Varric to be able to have that threat come across to Mako but without having really done or said anything that would play as suspicious to anybody else. And then, of course, it's all paired with this idea that he's walking over hot coals to help get rid of a foot fungus, which is just the kind of silly stuff that Varric gets up to. And it's all good. It's fun. That part's fun. But then, of course, we finish that plot line in this episode with, let's see, yeah, so Asami comes out over to visit Mako and to just keep touching base with him because she's worried about him and worried that he's going to make trouble for everybody, and wants to just try to, it's like, let's just go out to dinner and stop worrying about all this stuff. But that's when the bad cops come in with Lynn, saying they got a tip from the Triple Threat Triads that Mako actually was in on that whole sting, and they search his apartment and find explosives and money and use that to conclude that he's actually corrupt. And so he is arrested, and we have Asami left with sort of an I don't know what to believe expression. But it's Lynn that bothers me here because she was so cool last season. Hot-headed, stubborn, all those things, sure. But ultimately, like, pretty good. Like, she was a compelling character we cared about. But in this season, like, what we have right here is Mako is, like, saying, you're believing what the Triple Threat Triads are saying over me? And she's like, I have to follow up every lead. And it's like, but he's been telling her his suspicions about Varric, and she doesn't follow up on that. So it doesn't feel like good characterization. It feels just like they wanted this whole story of everyone against Mako, and so they had to make her not believe him, even though it doesn't, frankly, it makes her look incompetent. Which sucks, because she's cool otherwise, she used to be cool. This season doesn't make her look very cool. So in any case, that's where we leave that plotline this episode. We also have a little bit of stuff with Unalaq and Esna and Deska, his children, who they determine that if the Avatar is dead, and that might mean that there's no way to open the northern portal. So, but Unalaq has a plan, and so here's where we learn that if they enter the spirit world through the southern spirit portal, and they physically enter the spirit world, they do get to keep their bending, as opposed to the rules established in the previous series, which is that when characters astrally project their way into the spirit world, they don't have their bending in there. So his idea is that with the spirit portal open for the first time in 10,000 years, they can try using bending to open the portal, and maybe that will work, and that's the idea. So they go there and try it, but it's ultimately still proving too difficult. And in fact, Desna is injured by some of the feedback, energy. And this is where Esna's like, wait, no, we need to heal him. And Unalaq, thinks it's more important to keep trying to break open the portal. And so his kids leave while he continues and fails to open the portal himself. Now, obviously, this is kind of setting up something a little bit like with May and what was her name? Azula's friends in the original series, May and Tyling. I think that's it, something like that. Anyway, just in the sense of them being Azula's most loyal support up until it becomes really clear that Azula doesn't actually care about them, just uses them, at which point they turn on her. And, so what we have here is a little bit of, it's the second time where the kids are realizing, oh, like, you don't really care about us. You just want us for whatever we can do to help your plans. So they leave, and so Unalaq is frustrated that he wasn't able to open the portal. He goes to where Vaatu is imprisoned in the spirit world and apologizes, but Vaatu ominously forecasts, no, the Avatar is in the spirit world alive and she will find you, and bum bum bum. And so, but let's talk about now the main plot of the episode, which is that finally Korra and Tenzin are reunited, because that's the thing is, I talked a little bit about this last week, and the insights I gained from reading Film Crit Hulk's write-ups on this season, which I think is right on the money, when he says that a lot of the frustrating stuff comes from, it's not that there's too much story packed into a limited number of episodes, it's that they add all of this unnecessary stuff that doesn't do anything except delay what we know to be the real story. And so it's a bunch of stuff happening, but it feels like frustrating make work and requires bad characterization, because all it's really doing is delaying the real conflict. And so again, all of this time of Korra and Tenzin separated only to come back together, it's like, well, okay, now it's one thing to say, okay, we wanted their relationship to go through a low point and then for them to reconcile. But this is the 9th episode of the season. Did they have to be apart for so long? Anyway, we have Tenzin and family at the Eastern Air Temple, I believe. Yes, and we begin the episode with the reveal that Jinora, Tenzin's oldest daughter, seems to be able to see spirits that other people, including Tenzin, can't see. And so that's just a little bit of a tease early on. But then Korra shows up as Tenzin is continuing to, guide his family through this historic location. And there's a funny bit where Korra discovers, oh, you don't know what's been going on because you've been out of touch during this trip. Well, and then she just launches onto this litany of everything that's happened, and it sounds obviously ridiculous when it's summed down to, well, it turns out that Unalaq's actually evil, and he tricked me into opening the Southern Spirit Portal, but then there's also a war happening, a civil war, and my dad is, fighting in the Resistance, but now I have to, I couldn't get help from the Republic, but then I actually discovered that the original, Avatar sealed the spirit portals, and I realized what I have to do now is to stop him from releasing Vaatu before the harmonic convergence. And then Tenzin just waits a beat and says, I knew this would happen. Which is just silly, but fun. And so we have this discussion of like, okay, so now that we've got our characters reconciled and back on the A-plot, instead of messing with stuff that's just delaying the actual conflict, they figure, well, one solution, of course, would be, if only the Avatar can open the portal, they could just not go there, right? And theoretically, that would prevent it, because what we saw from the other plot line is that the only reason that Unalaq still has a chance to open the portal is because, Korra is going to find him there. But at the same time, I think where we last left things was that Unalaq told Korra that he didn't need her to open it. So they probably can't assume, just because we know and we've been told that only the Avatar can do it, doesn't mean that the characters would be correct to assume that that's true. Because, how dumb would they feel if they decide, oh, we're going to just hide out because he can't do it without us, and then he does it without them, and they're like, oh, well, we could have, So, in any event, they conclude that because of Unalaq's army, they can't get to the Southern Spirit Portal to close it again. So what they have to do is go into the spirit world through astral projection and then close it from that side, which is kind of a neat idea. But this is where, Tenzin is like, oh, yes, I've studied so much about the spirit world and meditation and all of this, and so I will help you. But then we have this sort of series of times where, like, Tenzin and Korra are trying to meditate their way into the spirit world, and Tenzin keeps finding things wrong with whatever's going on. Milo's not ringing the bell right. Kaya has made too much incense smoke. And it's starting to feel to us like, what's going on here? He seems like he's getting more frustrated than seems appropriate. Why isn't this working? And eventually Korra calls him on that and just says, what's going on? He admits that despite all his book study, his intellectual examination of the subject, he has never been able to actually enter the spirit world. And this surprises everybody. And like even his wife is saying, you spent days meditating in the temples, and he's like, well, but like I never actually got to do it. Those were all me continuing to try even though it wasn't working. And this is where it's revealed, because, Kaya has been observing that Jinora keeps seeing these spirits. She's seeing these spirits seeming to indicate that they should go somewhere else, but she can't quite bring herself to interrupt her dad to say that, until Kaya kind of calls her out and says, I think Jinora is seeing something. And we discover that, for all that Tenzin has intellectually studied the subject and never been able to actually connect to it, Jinora seems to have this sort of natural, innate connection where she just sees the spirits and she just knows, she understands them. And so it becomes clear that not only do they have to listen to her to go find this other meditation circle, but she's going to have to be the one to help Korra get into the spirit world. And obviously Tenzin is extremely reluctant about that for a couple of reasons. One, obviously it's really dangerous and he doesn't want his young daughter to be put at risk, which is frankly an extremely reasonable concern, right? If there seems to be any other way, but also at the same time he relents because it's like, well, okay, but the fate of the world is at stake and she wants to do it, and so, but of course the other piece of it is him having to just be able to let go of this idea that it should be him, right? He's Aang's legacy. He's supposed to be able to do it, and it's this idea, it's this deconstruction of the whole chosen one archetype of Tenzin realizing, okay, but it's not me though. And, we can also we can take a step back from where he is and say, well, but Jinora's your daughter. If you weren't who you were, she wouldn't be who she is. And so, you need to be able to let go of this idea that it has to be you. And that all kind of works. It actually reminds me a little bit of The Magicians, where we have the character Quentin go on kind of a similar emotional journey of getting inducted into this whole magical world and sort of assuming that everything seems to be lining up like he's this special chosen one, but then having to kind of gradually realize that, oh, well, maybe not actually. He is adjacent to an actual chosen one, and he is himself ultimately really just kind of a support character, but having to kind of realize and grapple with that. And it's good. And so, and then we also have an interesting little beat too, where there's dark spirits inhabiting this meditation circle, but Korra is able to calm them using the spirit bending technique that Unalaq taught her. And I think that sets up this whole feeling of like, okay, well, Unalaq's clearly up to no good here. He wants power, but he does know what he's talking about. Like, what he wants is bad for everybody else, so you do feel like you need to stop him, but like, he's actually correct about a lot of stuff. And so it's a little bit, again, like a parallel with Amon, in the sense that Amon, bad guy, for sure. He's doing things for the wrong reasons and using the wrong tactics and cruel and deceptive and all of that. But on the other hand, he was certainly right that there were a lot of non-benders who felt oppressed. And that, this is another example of something, we talked a little bit at the beginning of this season about how it would have been nice to put more emphasis on what, if anything, has changed in the city since all of that. Because President Raiko being established instead of this bending council is supposed to kind of reflect that, but they really don't talk about it very much. Anyway, but just this recognition that not first under Unalaq, she wouldn't have known how to calm those dark spirits. So, what's going on? Well, in any event, we finished this episode with them ready, Jinora and Korra ready to head into the spirit world to try to close the portal. But little do they know that Unalaq and Vaatu are waiting for them. So, we'll be back to talk more about the next episode, A New Spiritual Age, next week. And in the meantime, I'll talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.